with Mark during the coffee break. Our next presenter hails from Atlantic LNG, where he's currently seconded from BG, and he is the Vice President of HSSE and the CMER department. Henley Harewood is a qualified mechanical engineer who holds a BSc in mechanical engineering and an MSc in engineering management from our local university. Henley has approximately 31 years experience in the oil and gas industry, having worked at Petrotrin and some international exposure, including Egypt and Tunisia. This morning, Mr. Steve Ramrup spoke about, Dr. Steve Ramrup spoke about the black swan theory. And I wonder how many of us really know about the black swan theory. Henley is going to touch a little bit on something called process safety risk. And we saw a lot of definitions about what process safety, what risk is. But put it in simple language, risk is likelihood times consequence. And that black swan theory has a low likelihood of occurring. But when it does occur, it has a very high consequence. And it puts an interesting perspective in how we go about doing our designs. So without further ado, I would like to present to you Engineer Henley Harewood from Atlantic LNG.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. I thought I was born in 1980, 31 years is plenty years. Anyhow, I know Imtiaz had started this, by the way, all protocols observed, and it's something that we do at Atlantic, and that is, today is Friday, is 2 o'clock is after 2, you just had lunch, so we all know we have a tendency to sleep. So what we tend to do is you turn to the man next to you and you say, no sleep. Just shake that person's hand before I go into my discourse. No sleep. All right? Okay? Make sure it happens. Imtiaz. All right. The other thing is I will not be taking any talks or questions this evening about my jacket. My daughter gave me this and tell me come and wear this here this afternoon. All right? So, again, just to be a good daddy, I decided to be here. All right. Our presentation this afternoon, when we were putting this together, was called Engineering for Disaster. But when I was doing this, I said at the end of the day, I say, it's to go beyond that. I mean, at the end of the day, we are good engineers. We all have built plants. We have plants running. They do what they're supposed to do. They do good work. But then some things still happen. And you will see that we'll speak to this in this presentation in terms of what can go wrong, right? Like what's happening here now. Right? Now, I don't have any jingle like Antonia, otherwise you'll say call Dimas. All right? All right. Think I have it here now, hopefully. Oh, I'll stay in this corner. All right. Again, just a brief overview about Atlantic. By the way, Imtiaz reminded me I only have 20 minutes to talk. I don't know how I'll do that. But again, I'm not going to go through it. We process LNG, natural gas. We have a 4-train operation facility. Right? We're one of the world's largest producers of LNG. We play a significant role. All of this, you can always get us on the website, really. Trinidad and Tobago is the world's 7th largest exporter of LNG. Right, it's responsible for processing approximately half of Trinidad and Tobago natural gas. Speaking with Imtiaz just now, we process something like a daily of over 2,400 million cubic feet of gas per day. Right? And this is just a picture of it. I wouldn't go through all that. This is just a schematic. We have a 36-inch coming in with gas from BP. We have a 24, we have a 56. All of this bringing gas to the facility. A big inventory which we had to deal with. Right? And obviously, we're speaking about the trains, what train 1 could do in terms of million tons, metric tons per year, and train 1 doing 3, train 2 and 3 doing 3.3 each, million metric tons, and this is train 4, and this is the little gas, natural gas liquids coming out of that. Right. We all remember the Titanic. I don't know how much people understand this. So the Titanic was built around 1912. I don't know if you have anybody from 1912 here. Still, right? Now, that was the engineering marvel at that day. I guess you know how a team of engineers putting together the Titanic, and obviously there would be big meetings and big conversations and saying, okay, this is what you call one of the starships for the day because it was sea travel. Come like what you have now, I think you have those big Airbuses, which you'll see I'll talk about just now, the 380 and so forth. And here it is, the captain of the Titanic said then, I guess in some interview, I cannot imagine any condition which could cause a ship to founder. I cannot conceive of any vital disaster happening to this vessel. Modern shipbuilding has gone beyond that. Captain Smith, commander of the Titanic. And this is what he said. And we all know what history did after. I am saying this in the context, we have all these mega plants. We do stuff, again, and we have these plants running, best engineering practices. However, that black swan where something can go wrong can happen. And we have seen it happening again and again. For example, you had the Concordia. And this was an interesting experience again, almost 100 years after, right? And you remember one of the famous quotes on the Concordia was, go back to your rooms, there is nothing happening here. And look what is happening here. And this is my boy going around Italy to show people what he could do, right? And then we had this, again, an aviation incident, and I will be speaking in more or less using this to speak to my presentation this afternoon. This is Captain Sullyberg, whereby in 2009, he landed an Airbus 320 on the Hudson River and miraculously saved everybody. There's a book out on it, you'll see the book, I have it here. An excellent book, you should try and get this. Right, and this is what he said. He said this degree of safety requires tremendous commitment at every level of an organization and constant diligence and vigilance to make it a reality. Now, this captain speaking a different story here. Right? So we say beyond engineering and operations, what does Atlantic have in place? In other words, then, Atlantic was not built by just some people come together and say, okay, let's design a plant. You had solid engineering. This thing has been proven over and over. I think there's only one known LNG incident in the world to date. That is our LNG plant in Algeria, which failed, I think, in 2004, and an incident. So, I mean, if you look at this, you tell yourself globally, LNG is supposed to be safe. LNG plants are quite good. You had solid engineering behind it. However, we can't take things for granted. And we must operate in that prepared mode. How prepared are we? Recognizing Atlantic as a petrochemical plant and their inherent risks, Atlantic had a robust risk management system in place tied with 4 tenets of disaster management. So we understand there are risks in the system. We understand that, okay, things can go wrong. How we manage those, we must manage those in accordance with the 4 tenets of disaster management. We all know the tenets: preparedness, response, mitigation, and recovery. And this is what you had to do in terms of all your facilities, in terms of your engineering, in terms of making sure that if you had to respond, you respond in terms of that. Right? And then we're talking about preparedness, which is critical, which again you will see in terms of how Sully was able to respond into this. And we said preparedness is planned to how to respond in case of emergency in order to protect human lives and property, and developing capabilities and programs that contribute to a more effective response. And we talk about, we have major emergency management training, and then again we're talking about, this is where we're talking about here now, process safety. And I'm not sure if anybody spoke about this today, but this is the big thing right now that companies need to focus on. Process safety speaks to a series of initiatives. This is where you're starting to look in terms of your asset, in terms of the physical integrity. In other words, then, process safety speaks to keeping your hydrocarbons in the pipe or your product in the pipe. So in other words, then, with aging plants like what we have to understand, okay, what can we do, or what we should be doing to make sure that you don't have the leakage, you don't have the major explosion, you don't have those kind of stuff taking place. And what we have in Atlantic now, the focus is on the process safety initiatives. Actually, both Texas City and Macondo had 2 things in common. In that when those incidents happened on those set days, and if you go back to the books written by Hopkins, you will see that they were just celebrating major milestones in terms of personal safety. They were celebrating that, okay, they had achieved so many million man-hours without an LTI, both at the likes of Texas City and also at the likes of the Macondo, on the Macondo well. But the process safety, nobody was in that space. And that is where You had major accidents, major damage, plenty lives lost, and still some people still can't recover up to today. And one of the things we have is now we focus on that process safety initiative. Out of that, we're looking in terms of, we have an asset integrity management system whereby, again, it speaks to inspection processes, it speaks to understanding what can go wrong, doing the physical checks, collating data, etc. It also drills down to your permit to work system. How you do work on your facility. How is this work executed? What are the layers we have in place, etc. We also have now a control of work system. In other words, then, go on the days where people could just come and just work on a facility without having the necessary controls, recognizing that this is a gas-producing facility, right? A robust contractor management system, again, all of this coming out of that same whole asset and integrity initiative. In other words, then, and believe it or not, contractors right now play pivotal roles in terms of working on our facilities. Not only Atlantic, but all facilities. We all saw what happened with Macondo. We all saw again what happened in many plants. And again, it's to make sure we focus on the competency of contractors. We have had experiences whereby we had contractors in our facility and you ask them, do you know what is stored in that plant? And they will tell you PSI. You understand? So here it is, you driving on a facility and you're telling me PSI is stored in that plant. And then I want to put you to work on terms of a major operating plant where you can have accidents. So again, as a drill down from that process safety initiative, we're speaking also in terms of competency and competence, right? We have a risk register which is constantly reviewed by the risks. We constantly review our risks. So yes, the sound engineering happen, the best engineering happen, but risk can change. Aging plants, you need to understand what your risk profiles are and what you're putting in place to mitigate that. And this is something we have in place. And you know, again, this speaking to the likes of hazards and hazards, etc. We have a major hazard to do this year again. I think since my process engineers here, they can speak to that, right? So again, it's just as part of that whole assurance and reassurance that, okay, your systems or your engineering stuff is in place and doing what it's supposed to do. Then we have an integrated emergency management system, which is critical. At the end of the day, you must be able to show how you'll respond. All of this, again, is speaking to the preparedness. Then we're speaking also into the next leg in mitigation. Mitigation is an action or a long-term permanent nature that reduces the actual potential of risks of loss of property, etc. What do we have in place? Early warning systems, gas detection system, fire suppression system, alarm management. Again, if you look at the Longford experience that happened some years ago, one of the failings in that is that nobody was paying attention to the alarms. In other words, then they accepted the fact that alarms were just going off spurious and just closing them down until they had a big explosion taking place. And one of the things we understand here now, again, as part of that whole process safety initiative, is to understand alarm management. And it's something we have in place. Also, a robust maintenance system, which is critical. We need to have a fit-for-purpose, robust maintenance plan. I often tell people, with all due respect to people who might work at these CPEPs, this is not a CPEP industry. This is a natural gas facility. This will kill you and will kill others, right? This is serious business. Now, one of the things we did again as part of the process safety initiative coming out of Texas City, we recognized that, okay, you have to pull people off the blast zone. So one of the things we are about now is about what we're calling having blast-resistant shelters on the facility. If you've been to Point Fortin recently, you will see there's quite a nice building, state-of-the-art building really, up at Clifton Hill, where we move over 300 employees from the plant, put them in that building, not because we want to show what building we have, but we understand risk as part of the whole risk mitigation and put them there. And finally, we're looking in terms of sharing lessons learned from other LNG plants worldwide. In other words, then, we recognize that we are not in this alone. We have to liaise with other LNG plants to find out what is best practice, what is going on, where incidents have happened, how can we share. Actually, I was in a meeting up to Wednesday with one of our new shareholders, Shell, and this was a big conversation in terms of how we share lessons learned. In other words, then, something went wrong on your facility, how can you share that, right? And then again, we're just speaking in terms of mitigation and firefighting, etc., right? Then we go into response. Response is critical. I don't know how much people have read this book called Midnight to Bhopal. The Bhopal incident, we all know over 20,000 lives were lost. I want to tell you about that incident. When you had the leak, people were running to the leak rather than running away from, because you didn't have the drills, you hadn't done familiarization in terms of, okay, what does good emergency response look like? And this is something we understand here in terms of continuously doing drills over and over and over to get into that mind sphere. So what we're saying is that we understand the engineering has been done, we understand we have best practices, but again, and all of this is part of that process safety initiative to get people into that zone. And then, Antonia is not here. We are also a member of TMAS. And then, this is what Captain Sully said. He said, every choice in the airline industry made based solely on cost has ramification and should be evaluated carefully. We have to constantly consider the unintended consequences of safety. And right now, the airline industry is more or less the benchmark in terms of best safety practices worldwide. I often tell people, many of us who travel, despite how delayed our flight may be, if you're in the airport and you hear flight 432 ready to go to New York, however, it's missing 2 bolts on an engine, you're not going. You're not going. You understand? Because you're telling yourself, all of them 2 bolts mightn't do nothing. You tell yourself you're not going. All right, having said that, I remember some years ago I was coming back, about 2 years ago I was coming back from this place, London, Gatwick. And the pilot came and he sat next to me, the captain. So obviously I said, Captain, if you're sitting here, who's flying the plane? And I mean, he slept through from Gatwick to the likes of Barbados at the time. So I woke him up halfway. I said, Captain, if you're sleeping here, who's flying? He said, you know, these planes are programmed to lift off from Gatwick to fly all the way to Barbados. But he said, you know, nobody will go on the planes without the pilot. So, that's what I'm showing you. And what I'm saying is, this is what the industry, we have reached, levels in terms of best practices, right? And then we're talking in terms of emergency response, which I wouldn't go through again. We have everything here, and again, this is just cosmetic. Then, finally, we speak about recovery. Yes, we have a business continuity plan in place. It's not all there. We're constantly testing it. We're constantly building it. We're constantly working it. Shane, again, is going with best industry, right? And here he said, an airline accident is almost always the end of a result of casual chain of events. In other words, then, check it out. Cause any major incident you have, that is what's going on. If any one link was different, the outcome may have been different. Almost no accident was the result of just one problem. In most cases, one thing led to the other, and there was too much risk and a bad outcome. In aviation, we need to keep looking at the links in the chain, right? Then again, we understand the real world that we live in. We saw what happened in Algeria last year. We understand again what we need to put in place as part of our preparedness. I see the chairman showed me 5 minutes, so I'll try to run through this, right? So again, as we're still working in that zone, and obviously the rest is our whole incident command system, which, and then there's the next piece that he spoke about, right? How we landed, etc. And then I'll talk about, again, we have a whole incident command system in place. There's not a peer to it. This is where we're talking about peers in people, environment, asset, and reputation. This is where we're focusing on, because we all saw what happened recently, whereby out of incidents, who more or less ensures that your reputation is stuck is the people and the likes of your stakeholders, right? And this is one thing he said, if you follow this, and that is very nice, he said, I wanted to get a head count. I knew that there were 150 people, passengers and crews on the plane. Could we add up those in terms of routes, etc.? And then, he said, and this is where he's speaking about in terms of missing the head count, right? This is our command structure, again, simple. You have a 3-tier system, right, in terms of how we respond to any incidents, etc., again, which we have been through in terms of, and it's based on in terms of the Coast Guard stuff, right? And then again, this is one point that he made, right? And this is how we have. And then I like this a lot. He said, with authority comes great responsibility. He said, captain needs leadership skill to take individuals on his crew, make them feel and perform like a team. And this is what we all here need to be doing as leaders in our different shops. it's a heavy professional burden on a captain to know that he may be called upon upon to tap into the depths of his experience, to the breadth of his knowledge, and his ability to quickly think, weighing everything he knows while accounting for what he cannot know, right? And that is something we as leaders, we all face. And then I'm talking here about alarms and muster point, which is standard, which we have both building and plant alarms, etc., right? And then, again, we're speaking in terms of where we are in terms of the mutual aid, right, etc., right? And then some of the things we have done here with the borough of Point 14, recognizing that, again, the man in Point 14 doesn't want to hear that your plant has good engineering practices or was built on strong engineering practices. He wants to know that if anything happens, he and by extension his family can be moved safely. And this is a relationship now we're building with the likes of the borough in terms of emergency response and incident planning, how we could get them involved and stuff like that, right? And this is where he said, while still on the ferry, and I think Reuters had a big write-up on this, I began running through my mental checklist of other things I should be doing. Sometimes, again, we see it happen ever so often. We have an incident, and people's head go on different, and this is where he still was able to at least maintain his composure, right? And then he said here, it had been the most harrowing day of my life, but I was incredibly grateful to this ending. We hadn't saved the Airbus 328 loss. I mean, it was an engineering design, fail, and it gone. That was ruined, but the people on the plane, they will be returning to their families, all of them. And this is our mantra at Atlantic. We understand that, okay, at the end of the day, we have a major processing facility, processing over 2,400 million cubic feet of gas per day. And the intention is, what we have in place in terms of focusing on process safety is to ensure everybody, and by extension our community, right, can safely go about their business, going home safe and in one piece. I think this is the end of my presentation so far, right? Okay?
Thank you very much, Henley. So we can take 2 questions, and as you can see, Henley is one of our vibrant directors, vice president at Atlantic. Always talking to our contractor. He's well known. He's fondly known as Big H. I don't know why. So we'll take 2 questions. Yeah, one in front.
Mine is not a question, so don't count it. How can we get a copy of your presentation?
And by the way, this is one of my ex-lecturers, I guess you don't know me now that I get a ball. Both.
Right, so
We'll send it for you.
yeah, you should get a copy of all the presentations in the conference. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you, Henley.
Good, thanks.